I will switch between. My name is Girts. I'm representing. I'm founder of Erika Synths, and I was 5-6 years ago. I was thinking about meaning of life, and most people, they get. The most of depressions arise because people do not find their purpose in life and meaning of life. So I define for myself that a purpose or meaning of life is actually to pass your knowledge to next generations. And as most of you are teachers in a way, or musicians who also in a way pass their knowledge or skills to next generations. So please feel fulfilled that I advised you what's your feeling, meaning of the life. But first, of course, you start with your children to pass that knowledge. And 10 years ago, I decided to build an electronics constructor for my son. So I built small boxes, which each hosted some electronic components. And my son, who was 10 back then, he was able to design electrical circuits just by connecting those boxes and learn what happens when you make correct circuits and consequences of what happens when you do something wrong. And then I realized, well, I need something that makes sound. And then I built that box over there that is actually a loudspeaker with some simple generator inside. And then I searched, and then I thought, well, I need something that makes musical sounds. And I searched the internet and came across like huge community of do-it-yourself musical instruments and synthesizers, and started to build my own modular synthesizer. And actually, I went back to my hobby from my teenage years, because I started to do some do-it-yourself electronics when I was in my early teenage years. I guess I was 13 or something. And no information was available back then, because we were in Soviet Union, and I just had a couple of magazines from Russia to do that. But anyway, I ended this hobby of building modular synthesizers turned into Erika Synths, and today Erika Synths offers over 200 different modules, accessories for making music, including this one, which is kind of demo system, and this is another one for techno music. And so I somehow wanted to give like correct interpretation, why people should use, or musicians should use modular synthesizers. And that's not limited to musicians in general, because my estimate is that 90% of modular synthesizers never leave their studios or bedrooms where they are actually installed. Typical modular setup looks like this, and that's a highly experimental instrument. All speakers before me were talking about being rebellious, being heretic on way how you approach making music, and figuring out different ways of making music. And modular synthesizer in that sense is so great and inspiring tool, because you can do miracles on computers, but this tactile and this tactile interface and physical interaction with the instrument, that brings that to completely different level. On the other hand, the modular synthesizer can be highly personalized and custom-made instrument specifically for your needs. Because if you have a Moog synthesizer, this is Moog 1, like the flagship synthesizer, costs like 7,000 euros or something. Doesn't matter how good you play keyboard. It doesn't matter how good you program patches on the synthesizer, you still will end up approximately in the same territory of other Moog 1 owners. And that's a bit weird about any classical instrument, because when you play a trumpet, then there definitely will be some Korean or Chinese kid who spent all his childhood, under torture of his parents to learn this, to perfectly master this instrument, and technically he will play this instrument better than you. And then creativity comes in. But what I mean by a modular synthesizer, that you can basically have any instrument cut in pieces and start to replace those pieces. For instance, you can have this controller part, how you control the synthesizer. There are modulators and stuff. You have Moog oscillators, you have classical and very powerful Moog filter, and then you have envelope generators. So with modular synthesizer, you can mess all this up and say, well, I like Moog filters, and that will be like core of my musical expression. But I way better like Buchla oscillators, because they are more experimental. There are more variety on sound what they develop. And I like straightforward Doepfer envelope generators. And for controllers, I do not want keyboard, or I do not want pitch shift wheels or whatever. I want a gesture controller, and this is guys, they just launched an instrument which generates control signals for modular synthesizers. When you swing some small device which has Bluetooth connection to the receiver, and you actually act as a orchestra conductor and can play an instrument by that means. So basically you make a Frankenstein instrument with so unique possibilities that, and these are some quotes from Frankenstein, that I'm a creature of fine sensations, so you can make really detailed, nice music of it. Or if I can't inspire love, I will cause fear, and so I go noise music and stuff. And again, I can make dedicated instrument for doing that. So for 5,000 euros, you can buy good student buffet champagne clarinet, and that's with discount on Thomann. On the other hand, you can design an instrument which will set you apart from a mass, because anyway, Thomann is a huge retailer, was the largest in Europe, and I guess like a lot of musicians will have exactly the same clarinet. This is Pedro Estache. He's a main wind instrument player in Hans Zimmer Orchestra. He's a good friend of mine, and what he has a special wind controller which looks like clarinet, but it was produced in early 70s, called Lyricon, and this Lyricon outputs 6 different control voltage signals to control a modular synthesizer. So he has small tiny box that is a modular synthesizer that is dedicated to be controlled from this Lyricon. And this is my daughter. She's over there. She plays clarinet. And we were in this Hans Zimmer Orchestra show in Prague. So Pedro Estache gave a very inspiring speech about how he approaches wind instruments, and he is classically trained flute player, but he does a lot of modifications of instruments. He actually researches acoustics a lot. He developed his flute, which is not played like this, but like vertically, and does 3D printed parts of those instruments and so on and so on. Well, I want to tell that Pedro, he made dedicated instrument, dedicated modular synthesizer specifically for his creative needs and specifically for his creative expression. So this brings us to the fact that modular synthesizer is really great way to show, teach, and explore sound synthesis in very tangible way. So without, I'm sorry for those who are making software for sound synthesis, but without making any software, so here are all parts in place to make sound synthesis. And I was a teacher, I was science, physics and math teacher in early 90s, and then a couple of years ago I stopped teaching in university advertising and marketing because I realized that kids, they have so short attention span, they cannot concentrate. I don't know how it's here. And then I realized that out of like 20 kids, 20 like persons who are 20 plus, only 3 are kind of interested in what I'm teaching, and I'm kind of good teacher. and this the modular synthesis in that sense is very beneficial because here you can pay attention just on certain part of the instrument. So now you can say, well, let's talk about oscillators. So where sound comes from, how it's generated. So this is an oscillator, so please take closer look on this one. Let's explore it, what it does, and so on, so on. So they can concentrate at least for a certain time to this specific part, and then you can take them to next one, and so on and so on. But when we talk about sound synthesis, so there are plenty of ways how sound can be synthesized. And so subtractive synthesis, additive synthesis, frequency modulation synthesis, phase distortion, physical modeling, wavetable, sample-based, and so on and so on. So what I would like to show you how a modular synthesizer can illustrate those different ways of synthesis, and like more highlight like first two. Subtractive synthesis is the most basic one when you have rich, harmonically rich waveform and filter it off. So what I'm going to do, I will just take an input from the oscillator, and I'll take square wave input, pulse wave input, put it to the filter, and route it to the output of the. So, bring down frequency. You can take a classical Moog synthesizer, which is famous for its filters, and that's a bright example of subtractive synthesis. It takes harmonically rich waves and filters it down. So meaning, so what happens that from this square wave, pulse wave, by filtering down higher harmonics, I get a sine wave. There is an oscillator, filter, and then output where I get from square wave, I basically get a sine wave. And that's the basic idea of subtractive synthesis. But then somebody possibly came up with the idea that let's do it opposite.
I'm going to execute about that pattern super slow, bud. Hit replay. I'm gonna execute that.
So, instead of distilling the sound to the simplest possible shape, which is sine wave, or like we take like ball shape or round shape in nature, we could have a lot of those sounds and add them together. Meaning we are coming to additive synthesis, where we have a lot of oscillators and just add them together to create a complex waveform. Which is case, for instance, with, let's see how it sounds. Oh, I have 6 oscillators which are detuned, and they generate approximately same sound, same amplitude of sound. So we end up basically with complete mess. And this is actually schematics of our metallic noise generator in analog hi-hats module. So basically this can, when you apply some amplitude, you can have feeling of hi-hats working. But as you see that just mixing up different frequencies without control over them, you end up with mess. You basically end up with noise. So the real mastery of additive synthesis basically is to add correct frequencies at correct amplitudes, so you end up with some nice sounding sounds, if you wish to. Of course, personally I prefer noise over sound. So what's idea behind additive synthesis basically is that you have a sine wave of key frequency, let's say 440 hertz, and then you add another sine wave, and then with different amplitude, when you add another sine wave with other amplitude, and all of a sudden you are getting closer and closer to the square wave. If you put it differently, you have sine waves with different amplitudes, with frequencies which are multiplications, like real number, not real, but natural number multiplications of the basic tune, and add them up, and you are getting closer and closer to square wave. And somebody noticed that the more you add those higher harmonics, or sine waves of multiplications of main frequency, you're getting closer and closer to the actual square wave. And here we get to this Fourier transformations. Basically what French mathematician Fourier discovered, that he discovered the way how to transfer amplitude and time functions. Like sine wave basically shows how amplitude of the waveform changes in time, or how the membrane of the speaker changes its behavior during as time passes. So it oscillates, slowly. To change it into frequency domain functions, meaning that how they identify what frequencies need to be added together and at what amplitudes to get to more complex waveforms. And when actually, as I was studying in university in the early 80s, I could solve those equations. I would not do it now, but the basic idea is this, that you can turn any waveform into different function by, and this works both ways. So you can have this frequency domain functions turned into time and amplitude functions. And this is called Fourier transformation because they work both ways. And interesting enough that you can build any wave shape based on those formulas, meaning that that you can design your own waves if you know how those formulas work. For that, I have one of oscillators, which can generate different waveforms based on those transformations. So now we hear a sine wave. Unfortunately, the screen is so small. Now we hear the sine wave of, I can tell you even what is the frequency. It's, let's say, G2. And it's a sine wave. And we have one of ways how to edit that wave is this frequency domain like layout. So if it's sine wave, there is just one bar here that shows that we have a sine wave of frequency corresponding to G2. Now when I go back and change the different wave, for instance, I'll choose triangle. Or sawtooth wave. So this is sawtooth wave. It sounds more harsh because theoretically it has more harmonics behind. Let's check it out. So I go back to edit, go to this, and we see that we have like basic frequency of same G2, and then we have descending amount of different higher frequencies which are added there exactly with the same level of detailing. If you go to square wave, so we'll go to square wave, it sounds more harsh, go back. And here we see that in square wave case, we have only odd frequencies of higher harmonics. But what I can do with this oscillator, I can go to some certain harmonic and start to increase its presence, like amplitude, and you see that how sound is changing and actually square wave is losing its form. You can go to different one. Again, there is different presence of and we can damage the square wave, and it's really difficult to come back to original result at the end of the day. So yeah, basically what this oscillator does, you can manipulate those amplitudes of certain harmonics and design your own wave, or start to disturb or to change the how this like waveform looks like. And that's a very simple way to explain how Fourier transformations work and how different waveforms are built. Because what Fourier found that to build a perfect waveform, of course, you need infinitely many of those higher harmonics. But
no, please go ahead. I mean, you're right. I mean, that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Infinitely many of those harmonics, but it's enough for them. For instance, this particular oscillator, it extrapolates it, and you actually can see 32 harmonics here on the screen. But when it makes calculations of waveforms, it actually it takes like a lot. I do not specifically know how many.
Okay.
And so on, so on. And then there are, of course, different ways of synthesis and so on. That was basically it on this basics on how to like tell students, or how to tell students what Fourier transformations are and what's a basics of additive synthesis, because all additive synthesis is about adding different sounds together but in controlled way. So you do not end up with noise where you add random frequencies and random amplitudes, but basically you have operators that add certain frequencies with certain amplitudes so that resulting sound is what you want, actually. Yeah? And then I will skip a few slides and go to the So, back to modular synthesizers, in our studio, not this particular one, in our studio there is a demo synthesizer which has 92 inputs, outputs and 104 inputs. This one has slightly less, but still we are talking about same numbers. So, could you guess in how many ways you can interconnect inputs and outputs if you have enough patch cables? Like you have, in this particular case, 92 patch cables, so you start patching, trying out all possible connections, being creative. So, how many ways? Approximately. Your guess.
No.
Give me one.
Factorial, 92 factorial?
I asked my ex-colleague from university to do the calculation. So this is much. This is just empty number. I wanted to have some reference. So in our known universe, there are 1 times 10 to the power of 22 stars. So this is a number in how many ways you can develop patches on your modular synthesizer. Of course, some zillion patches will not sound particularly good. But definitely you will find some really brilliant sounding ones. And imagine if we would start trying out all patches on even this synthesizer here, then I guess the universe will shrink back to the singularity before this conference would end. Therefore, I'm ending my presentation now. And if there are any questions, so please feel free to ask.
In the additive synthesis part that you showed, are those digital oscillators?
This one is, yes, this one is digital oscillator, of course, because you need advanced algorithms to do it. But basically you can start simple additive synthesis by having several analog oscillators and just tuning them and like changing the amplitude, and you will still have some rudimentally additive synthesis.
Or having one of those. Hammond organs.
Yes, for instance, yeah, if you push all keys together, so you also have something like that. Yes, yes.
Do you mind share with us whether the microcontroller or the microchip behind them?
This one?
Yes.
That's has ARM controller there, and one of our engineers, he's really one of the best in the world of getting nice sounding algorithms out of it. Like honestly, like we had a review of this oscillator in Future Music magazine, and they said that this is the best sounding wavetable oscillator what they actually have reviewed. And this one is actually next generation of this one, because this is simple wavetable oscillator where you plays back wavetables. This one also is a wavetable oscillator, but with more advanced algorithms and more features that you can do, not only wavetables, but also additive synthesis stuff and morphing between waveforms and so on and so on.
So it has inputs also where you can maybe change the spectrum.
Yes,
absolutely. Yeah,
yes,
okay,
yes,
yeah,
yes,
okay.
yes. So the beauty of modular synthesizer is that every parameter is controlled by voltage. So
yes.
you can control it manually, or you can control it by external devices, which basically you do also on software. So you can you can have a bit crusher controlled by LFO, because here is a bit crusher input. And in that sense, I really like modular synthesizer. I'm a manufacturer, so I have to promote modular synthesizer, but still, it's very easy to explain how things work, because the layout is clear and it's all there. And of course, it takes time to figure out how it works, and at the same time it's creative and it's entertaining. And like, remember Karl H. Stockhausen, he had few sine wave oscillators and noise generator, and he had spent years of cutting tapes and recording all this, rewinding everything. Nowadays musicians cannot afford, unfortunately, to spend years with that, and you know it better than me. But still, and take for instance modern talking. If they would make their own patches instead of playing presets, they would not have that amount of creative output they had, like 4 new albums per year. But nowadays, when you really want to stand out and when you really want to go experimental, then this is a thing.
I keep going with the questions. So there, what do you think about from the when you are designing a product like this? When about the possibility of open the functionality of the module, like to be this kind of multifunctional, where a user could upload the code for a complex oscillator or something like that?
Yeah, there are open source modules or open hardware modules where you can design your patches in Mux, for instance, and upload that functionality to the module, and you assign that there are, for instance, 4 control knobs and X inputs and X outputs, so you can basically design a module in Mux or another software, upload to the hardware module, which looks like this, for instance, and you have this digital module in hardware form. There are such modules, so if you know coding, then you
well,
can...
I understand that part, but I understand as well that there is a design decision, for example, from a design point of view. Some people don't like to have knobs that don't have any defined function.
Yeah, of course, and that's different. Well, for instance, on analog modules, of course, you will have knob which has specifically dedicated function. Like on oscillator, you have a big knob you have for tune, and that's actually our philosophy, that we try to have advanced functionality modules with a layout that you can play on a live set, and like bigger buttons do the thing. For instance, this sequencer is like highly complex device which can create 4 sequences simultaneously, but it is designed in taking in mind a friend of ours who is completely blind, and he has to be able to use it. So we actually will ask him to make a demo how to use this sequencer, because and he also has a modular, so because he has this tactile memory and the modular synthesizer has this tactile feedback, the blind person can use it. And of course there are a lot of modules with very tangled interfaces, so that like this one is hard for visually impaired person because you need to see a screen. In this one, screen has secondary function basically, so every functionality is bring on the front with knobs and encoders, and that's actually what I prefer. That module has certain functions, and bigger knobs do the bigger thing. And yeah, because even though sometimes you have quite similar products, user interface makes a difference. If you want to decide what car to buy, basically every car takes you from place A to place B, and then there are nuances, and basically those nuances are user interface.
do you have any relationship with the Latvian Academy of Music?
Yes, I had a workshop there with the synthesizers, and my daughter studies in Latvian Academy of Music, and they are about to get a system for their electronics class, because that's again easy way how to start to understand how actually sounds are made and so on. So I actually, as an ex-teacher, I really like to collaborate with educational institutions, because that's our purpose and meaning of life. Thank you. It's, I guess, time for coffee break.
Yeah.